The moment "Take Me Home," country roads echoed across the airwaves, the world stood still. It wasn't just a song, it was a heartfelt anthem that introduced us to a voice that felt like home. John Denver didn't just sing, he reached into our souls with every lyric. For the next 2 decades, he didn't follow the spotlight, he became it. A gentle spirit with a guitar, who ruled the charts and redefined what it meant to make music from the heart. John Denver wasn't just a voice that touched hearts, he was a symbol of peace, love, and authenticity. To millions, he represented the ideal celebrity, humble, kind, and inspiring. But behind the curtain of fame and folk melodies, a far darker story was unfolding, one that shattered the very image his fans had come to cherish. From the painful confessions of his ex-wives to shocking revelations hidden in official records, Denver's offstage life was filled with contradictions that no one saw coming. Years of whispers and rumors have finally erupted into truth, and what's now known about John Denver isn't just disturbing, it's heartbreaking. Born as Henry John Deutschendorf Jr. on December 31, 1943, in Roswell, New Mexico, Denver's early years seemed full of promise. With a family passionate about flying, it looked like the perfect start. But as time would reveal, even the brightest stars carry shadows deep enough to stun the world. John Denver's father, Captain Henry Deutschendorf Sr., wasn't just any pilot, he was a decorated Air Force hero who shattered speed records in the legendary B-58 Hustler and earned a place in the Air Force Hall of Fame. To the world, he was a symbol of strength and honor. But to young Denver, this life came with a heavy cost. The constant relocations, from Arizona to Alabama to Texas, meant a childhood spent in motion, never rooted. He struggled to make friends, never staying long enough to belong. That quiet loneliness, that aching sense of not fitting in, followed him into adulthood and seeped into the very music that made him famous. But amidst the turbulence, came one anchor. At just 11 years old, living in Tucson, Arizona, Denver received a gift from his grandmother that would change his life, a weathered Gibson guitar, crafted back in 1910. It was more than an instrument, it was a lifeline. That old guitar became his sanctuary, a steady companion in a world that refused to stand still. And through it, John Denver began to give voice to his heartache, creating the melodies that would one day echo across the globe. As John Denver grew, so did his connection to music. He joined the Tucson, Arizona Boys Chorus, where he learned not just to sing, but to harmonize, to blend, to perform. The shy, lonely boy was slowly finding his voice, not just in melody but in presence. By high school, he was already stepping onto small stages, performing folk songs with a quiet confidence. What began as a comforting escape was now transforming into his true identity. In a world that was always shifting beneath his feet, music became his anchor, it gave him purpose, belonging, and a place to finally call his own. But one part of his world remained difficult, his relationship with his father. Known as Dutch, Captain Deutschendorf was a man of discipline and ambition. He expected excellence, demanded perfection, and often struggled to understand his son's artistic spirit. Denver, gentle and introspective, wasn't built for harsh orders, he only wanted to write songs and make people feel something. This clash created distance between them. Yet, in a surprising twist, the skies brought them together. When Denver learned how to fly, it sparked a connection between father and son that words never could. Amid the clouds, they finally found common ground, and, for once, peace. Maybe the activity's danger served as a reminder to them of how important living loved ones are. Much later in Denver's life, the same risk would prove to be tragic. Denver's sense of liberation from flying remained with him and frequently appeared in his songs. Denver studied architecture at Texas Tech University after graduating from high school. However, he soon discovered that building design was not what he wanted to do. His goal was to become a musician. He thus dropped out of school and relocated to Los Angeles. He made the decision to alter his last name at that point. He adored Colorado's mountains and rivers, which is why he named the state capital Denver after it. It seemed like a new beginning. Denver had a huge break in the middle of the 1960s. He was selected to be the lead singer of the Chad Mitchell Trio from a pool of over 200 singers that tried out. This was his first genuine opportunity in the music industry. He was able to perform in front of audiences around the nation as a result. He made 3 albums during his roughly 2 years with the group. His confidence as a singer increased while he was on stage. Denver took in the hardships of life on the road and gradually started to discover his voice. Leaving on a Jet Plane is among his most well-known compositions from that era. It became a #1 success on the Billboard charts at the end of the 1960s after being recorded by the folk trio Peter, Paul, and Mary. That song demonstrated that Denver's writing could genuinely resonate with listeners, despite the fact that he was not yet a well-known solo musician. Denver didn't turn around after the 3 parted ways. On his own, he was already beginning to move up the charts. Denver made it sound as though it was easy to transition from a group singer to a solo star. When his breakout album, Poems, Prayers, and Promises, was released in the early 1970s, his career really took off. Although it nearly didn't, the song, Take Me Home Country Roads, ended up becoming a classic. For a moment, it appeared as though the song could fail due to sound issues with the first copies. However, Jerry Wynn Robb, his new manager, persisted. He persuaded radio stations to play the tune, beginning in Denver, Colorado. It gained popularity gradually after being released in mid-April. It peaked at #2 on the Billboard Hot 100 by the end of August. That following month, it turned gold after selling over 1 million copies. The song continued to be well-liked throughout time and finally sold over 1.5 million copies. In the United States alone, there are 5 million digital copies. West Virginia designated it one of their official state songs because of its powerful influence. In response, Denver issued a new album in September 1972 titled Rocky Mountain High. It was the first of his 6 albums to make it into the U.S. Top 10. On the Billboard 200 list, it reached its highest position at #4. Rocky Mountain High, the title tune, became one of his most popular songs and peaked at #10 on the 1973 Billboard Hot 100. It peaked at #29 on the year-end chart that year and gained popularity among fans who enjoyed the great outdoors and the natural world. The song is even more relevant to Denver because the album cover was shot at Slaughterhouse Falls in Aspen, Colorado. Rocky Mountain High became one of Colorado's 2 official state songs decades later. Denver's most prosperous years were 1974 and 1975. 4 of his songs peaked at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in a span of just 18 months. In March 1974, Sunshine on My Shoulders became the #1 song. In July, Annie's song came next. The song, Thank God I'm a Country Boy, peaked in May 1975. September of the same year saw the release of And I'm Sorry. His ability was showcased in these tunes. Some, such as Sunshine on My Shoulders, were kind and optimistic. Others, such as, Thank God I'm a Country Boy, were vivacious and joyful. He penned Annie's song for his bride in 10 minutes, and it ended up being a traditional wedding favorite. By this time, Denver was widely available on television, radio, and in millions of households nationwide. He also put out 3 albums during this heyday, all of which peaked at #1. When Denver's greatest hits were published in 1973, they sold more copies than Elvis Presley and went on to become the best-selling album in RCA Records history. In the U.S., his 1974 album Back Home Again achieved triple platinum status. He then released Windong in 1975, and it became a double platinum record. These 3 albums collectively demonstrated Denver's status as a genuine music superstar. He had composed nearly 200 of the approximately 300 songs he produced by the conclusion of his career. He received 4 platinum albums and 12 gold albums overall. He was one of the most successful singer-songwriters of the 1970s, with over 33 million copies of his songs sold worldwide. Denver made a successful and unexpected foray into Hollywood. He co-starred with comedic icon George Burns in the popular 1977 film Oh God. Denver had never performed before, but people liked his candor and friendliness. A normal grocery store manager was selected by God to deliver a divine word in the Carl Reiner-directed movie, which was based on an Avery Corman novel. People found it simple to relate to Denver's character because of the authenticity and plausibility of his acting. The film was a huge hit, grossing over $51 million in the US and even receiving a contender for an Oscar for its writing. Denver's debut role demonstrated that he was capable of more than just singing, even if he did not return for the film's sequels. He became one of the rare musicians who transitioned into acting with success. Even though some detractors didn't think he could, Denver managed to gain popularity outside of the US. Jerry Weinenraub, his manager, thought it was critical for Denver to establish direct communication with supporters abroad. Thus, Weinraub organized a number of television specials for British viewers in spite of some skepticism. He clarified that they would go directly to the people because the critics wouldn't make Denver a celebrity. The plan was a great success. Denver gained admirers in Britain and contributed to the development of a devoted following throughout Europe with his kind demeanor and distinct singing voice. These specials helped Denver become a global celebrity and demonstrated that television could be a potent medium for introducing artists to the globe. One of the greatest accolades in television, the Primetime Emmy Award, was even given to his special, An Evening with John Denver. He performed with friends, told stories, and sang his songs in numerous additional specials. His music was played in homes all over the nation and the world thanks to these performances. He was one of the most adored performers of his era because every performance seemed intimate. Denver, however, was not merely a vocalist. He addressed the U.S. Senate in the middle of the 1980s. Parents were requesting warning labels for music they thought was too offensive at the time. Denver defended free speech despite his reputation for soft-spoken songs. Rocky Mountain High, one of his songs, was originally banned because it was mistakenly believed to be about drugs. He defended the freedom to free speech and clarified the facts. He did not support warning labels, unlike what many people believed. The battle over free speech in music was altered by that moment, and its consequences may still be seen today. During the Cold War, Denver was the first American performer to play in the Soviet Union in almost 10 years. He performed in 11 cities, including Tallinn, Leningrad, and Moscow. There was more to his tour than just music. The goal was to bridge two cultural divides. His melodies and message of peace touched even those who did not understand English. He wrote a song called Let Us Begin, which advocated for peace rather than conflict, as a result of the trip. The album Live in the USSR featured recordings from that tour. Following the Chernobyl nuclear accident, which drove many people to flee their homes and resulted in severe health issues, Denver returned to the Soviet Union in the late 1980s. He performed at a Moscow benefit performance that brought in a substantial sum of money. The recordings generated additional revenue. It was not a political night. It was about being kind and considerate. The crowd felt heard and visible. Denver demonstrated that a single guitar player might have a significant impact. Denver brought his music to China around the beginning of the 1990s. The Chinese were interested in him after he had been cut off from the outside world for years. Schools were already singing songs like Country Roads. He was invited by the government to visit a number of places, and one of his performances was televised to almost 2 billion people. Some had hoped to host the performance at ancient locations such as the Temple of Heaven or the Forbidden City. He was warmly received by Chinese youth, and Denver had previously caught the attention of the nation's leader. He became one of the most well-known Western musicians in China at the time of his tour. Denver became increasingly concerned with assisting people later in life. He put out a best hits album titled Homegrown in the 1990s. All of the proceeds from that CD were used to support the homeless. He also contributed to the founding of the World Hunger Project at this time. He was given the Presidential World Without Hunger Award in recognition of his efforts. Using his celebrity to increase support and awareness for the environment, he was also involved in environmental initiatives. In addition to establishing the WinStar Foundation, Denver initiated the Planted 2000 initiative, which aimed to restore forests and plant trees. He began to value his charitable endeavors equally to his musical career. But he had a horrible personal life. His union with Annie Martel was a dream come true. Together, they adopted 2 children, and in just 10 minutes, Denver composed Annie's song for her. However, the issues in their relationship increased along with his notoriety. Annie frequently felt lost in his shadow and invisible. They made the decision to have a divorce in the early 1980s. What came next was terrible and messy. Denver was typically kind in public, but in private he was quite different. He reportedly grew irascible and erratic. The divorce was heartbreaking and bitter. Denver lost control one day after Annie felled some of his prized oak trees at their Aspen home. He arrived with a chainsaw and tore their furniture to pieces rather than argue. Even their bed was cut in half by him. It was a startling instance, a sinister representation of a failed marriage. Witnesses and friends found it hard to believe that this was the same quiet singer they knew. However, it was Denver who had filed for divorce. His pristine, wholesome reputation was tarnished by the abuse described in the court documents. Even several of Denver's past managers acknowledged that he had a terrible temper, and friends backed Annie's side. Despite Annie's silence following the divorce, Denver's reputation had already suffered. A lot of people who had before admired him started to view him very differently. In the middle of the 1980s, Denver met Australian actress and singer Cassandra Delaney at a Sydney hotel. She caught his attention right away while he was playing in the hotel bar. Their romance progressed swiftly. With close friends and family, they had a stunning mountain wedding by the late 1980s. Although it appeared to be a fairy tale, there were issues right away. Later, Cassandra claimed that it was really difficult to be with a famous man. She was significantly younger than Denver. His popularity followed them everywhere, and he was prone to mood swings. Although they appeared flawless to the outside world, tension existed behind closed doors. Jessie, their daughter, was born in the late 1980s. For years, Denver had thought that a childhood disease prevented him from becoming a parent. The birth of Jessie seemed miraculous. Some even questioned whether they had her with medical assistance. Denver became more domineering when Jessie was born. Cassandra sensed his growing aloofness and jealousy. Their brittle bond started to deteriorate. Cassandra was interviewed by an Australian magazine in the mid-1990s. Denver, according to her, had no real pals. Employees feared him. Secretaries frequently sobbed and resigned. He appeared polite to the outside world. However, according to Cassandra, this was merely an act. He was frequently irate and severe in private. She claimed that he tried to dominate her life, shouted at her, and drank excessively. She remained silent for a while in the hopes that he might change, but to no avail. Early in the 1990s, they split up, and a few years later, their divorce was finalized. It was a hard legal battle. Denver accused Cassandra of making him appear ridiculous and filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against her. In order to maintain custody of Jessie, Cassandra fought. Denver's book later discussed this. He claimed that the divorce caused him great pain. He was never the same after that. He published his autobiography, Take Me Home, in the middle of the 1990s. Many fans were stunned. He wrote about his use of cocaine, LSD, and cannabis. He acknowledged cheating on both of his spouses as well. Affairs had plagued even his first marriage to Annie Martel, the subject of the ballad Annie's Ballad. He admitted in his writing that he occasionally behaved more forcefully than was appropriate. One story caught our attention. During a confrontation, he once cut a bed in half with a chainsaw. His impeccable image was shattered. Fans witnessed a hitherto unimagined aspect of him. In the 1970s, Denver was one of the most well-known singer-songwriters in America. With his gentle voice and acoustic style, he captured the hearts of millions of people and rose to the top of the music charts. He released 25 albums with the label RCA, 13 of which were gold and 8 of which were platinum. RCA's best-selling record ever was his Greatest Hits album. However, things began to shift by the mid-1980s. Denver's sound was out of step with the trend toward heavier synthesizers and drum machines in music. Following its 1986 sale to General Electric, RCA made the decision to cut costs and concentrate on up-and-coming performers. They let him go despite Denver's lengthy and fruitful relationship with them. He was taken aback. He had recently completed One World, which he assumed would be his second album with them, and he felt that a contract renewal was assured. Instead, believing they could make more money from other performers, RCA decided to move on. Denver said that they had taken him with no consideration, even after all the income he had brought them over time. Without a different label inclined to take him on, he needed to launch his next albums through his own label, Windstar. It was a hard lesson that even huge stars may be left in the back of whilst tune developments and commercial enterprise dreams exchange. Over time, Denver spent greater than 20,000 hours flying. He earned licenses to fly unmarried engine planes, multi-engine planes, gliders, or even lighter-than-air aircraft. But inside the 90s, his personal struggles commenced to seize up with him. Denver turned into arrested for driving beneath to have an effect on now not just once however 2 times. The Federal Aviation Management, which calls for pilots to have a valid medical certificates to prove they are matched to fly, took action. After his second arrest, they refused to renew his scientific certificate. Without that certificates, his pilot's license intended not anything. To get it returned, he would have had to prove that he now not had an ingesting trouble. But he never finished that process. Flying had as soon as been his best pleasure, but now even that become taken from him. What made it worse become how he replied to the FAA's orders. Once they sent him licensed letters annoying that he give up his medical certificate, he both left out them or sent them again unopened. Legally, this created a loophole. Due to the fact he never conventional the letters, the FAA could not entire the process to revoke his license. So on paper, he could nonetheless fly, but not due to the fact he was genuinely in shape to. It turned into best due to the fact the gadget relied on his cooperation. That loophole sooner or later closed in March of 1997. Denver signed for one of the FAA's certified letters, which meant they may formally ground him. From that moment on, every flight he took became unlawful. Getting back his flying popularity might have required proving his sobriety and assembly all of the policies he had omitted for years, but Denver chose not to do this. Nevertheless, none of this stopped him from flying. On October 12, 1997, he took out a small experimental plane he had just bought. He began working towards takeoffs and landings close to Terry, California. He had owned the aircraft for handiest sooner or later and had spent just about 1/2 an hour with an instructor earlier than flying it by myself. The plane had been closely changed into tough to perform. One predominant trouble changed into the fuel selector valve. It were moved to a hard-to-attain spot in the back of the pilot's left shoulder. To replace tanks, Denver had to twist in his seat and reach returned awkwardly. The valve became stiff and regularly wished pliers to turn. The gasoline gauges have been additionally behind him, so he couldn't examine them easily. He needed a handheld mirror to check them. And even then, the readings had been not clear. That morning, while flying near Terry Peninsula Airport, he used up the gas inside the left tank even as practicing takeoffs and landings. Witnesses heard the engine sputter and then cross silent. Because the gasoline ran out, Denver tried to switch to the proper tank. To do that, he needed to attain behind him and use pliers to show the valve. For the duration of that process, he by accident pressed the proper rudder pedal. The plane's nostril dipped sharply down and within seconds, it crashed into the Pacific Ocean. Denver was killed instantly. Investigators from the Countrywide Transportation Safety Board observed that Denver had began the flight with too little gas, most effective approximately 3 gallons in a single tank and 6 within the other. They said his unfamiliarity with the aircraft became a major reason for the crash. They also pointed out the hazardous design changes that made switching gasoline tanks in mid-flight almost not possible. Even though Denver became a professional pilot, he had not well organized for flying this aircraft. The document made it clear the crash might have been prevented. If Denver had refueled, trained greater, or flown an aircraft with a more secure gasoline gadget, the accident might by no means have befell. His very last flight was a sad reminder of how small errors and overlooked warnings can cause a sad stop. Denver's dying within the late 90s changed into no longer only a tragic event. It changed into a AA00333992A1E424449A037E2560BF2. Whilst tens of millions of fanatics mourned the loss of a loved people's singer, the crash additionally found out an extra complicated aspect of his non-public lifestyles. Denver's deep love for flying now and again crossed the line into volatile conduct. He changed into recognized to perform glider hints with the engine off and to fly even when he did not have the proper medical approval. Those movements showed a pattern of pushing limits, from time to time in dangerous methods. Even after the aviation authorities warned him commonly and took away his clinical certificate, he stored flying. The crash also confirmed some of terrible alternatives. Flying with little gas, the usage of an aircraft with known design troubles, and flying on my own without submitting a flight plan. Those decisions had been now not random. They had been part of a bigger sample of unstable conduct that ended in tragedy. Despite the fact that no tablets or alcohol have been found in his frame after the crash, his in-advance arrests for riding under the impact and a crash in the mid-90s while he had been ingesting had already damaged his recognition. Nonetheless, in spite of those flaws, Denver's legacy has stayed sturdy. His music maintains to touch humans all over the world with its messages of peace, love for the earth, and deep emotion. Songs like Take Me Domestic, United States Roads, Annie's Song, and Rocky Mountain High are nevertheless loved these days as classics of folks and U.S. track. He became also one of the first famous musicians to make being concerned for the environment a big part of his paintings, lengthy before it became a not unusual cause. In the end, human beings picked to keep in mind John Denver for his deep connection to both nature and track instead of for the bad alternatives he made in life. His 15-feet bronze statue on show at Red Rocks Amphitheater perfectly reminds fanatics of the greatness of the man who traveled the ones U.S. roads.